Hi there.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm well, yourself.
I'm doing okay, thank you. Trying to get ready here.
Do we have an agenda?
I don't think so. I
Okay.
think the three of us, yeah, I don't know.
Okay. I was confused because I had seen it was just myself and Carrie. And so can you maybe update me on, because I think I've jumped onto this meeting. It's in my calendar and I'm like, where's everybody at? And why does it only show me and Carrie?
Well, I'm saying the same thing and I'm supposed to be presenting, so I'm a little confused too. I'm hoping I've got the right link. Oh, here we go. Here's Power in Nature. We're here.
Okay. Okay, if you're doing are you doing like a slideshow presentation?
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm on my phone, so I'm gonna jump off and get return on my laptop so I can see better.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Good
Thank you all
afternoon.
for being here today. Oh, sorry, who was that?
Sorry, this is Landon. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Landon. It's Kay here.
Hey, Kay, I'll be headed to your neck of the woods in a few days.
Well, where are you going to be?
Well, we'll see which highways are open.
Yeah.
I'm actually trying to get north of Bridgeport.
Well, we've got an event up there at Olin Ranch on Saturday if you're in the area.
I might be. Feel free to shoot me a link if you've got some more information.
Yeah, will do.
Josefina, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, would I be able to share my screen? I'd like to share a resource that we have, this web tool.
Yeah, of course. I can make you co-host.
Okay.
Would you like to present first?
I can. It's yeah, whatever you think would be best for the flow.
Perfect. Yeah, I just went ahead and made you co-host so that whatever you want to share screen, you can do that easily. And then Kay, would you want to go second?
Sure. And I'd like to
Okay,
share screen as well, if that's okay.
Perfect. I'll see if I could do that at the same time, but if not, then after Vanessa's done, I can make you co-host as well. Oh, I can just make everyone co-host. This is perfect. Awesome.
I'll be right back. Do we have a minute? We do. Oh, I'm trapped in my office. My door is locked. I can't get out.
Oh no.
I know.
I've got this new camera that's supposed to be like eye level, but sometimes I'm apparently too close to it.
Hi, Miss Melanie.
Hey, hey.
Hello. Thank you for being here today.
Is it working? I don't know what's happening. while we're waiting, can I ask someone for maybe a little quick tech help? When I click to my slideshow, it's going on both screens. So it's like it's both of my monitors are showing the same thing. Is there a setting not to, I've never had that happen before.
Oh, I was supposed to start a Zoom, but I'm trying to.
Oops. But he knows, okay.
Usually I have to do any sort of different display screens on the like actual computer level and not on Zoom. It's like, oh, what screen displays on which device. If that makes sense. Like on computer settings.
Yeah, so like I said, you can drop mine in the chat afterwards. I wasn't intending on sharing it during it's. I feel like this was too fast to just. Yeah, I put it together this morning.
Oh, it looks great, and I think it'll be a great tool for people to look up terms afterwards and stuff.
Right, exactly.
Is everybody staying safe during the fires?
And hurricanes and earthquakes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We're more than just NorCal, right? We're everywhere.
We have pretty intense flooding here.
Oh.
I saw some really wild video of Death Valley National Park.
Yeah.
Wow.
And 395, I'm not even sure how far down it goes right now. Olancha area, I think up into Bishop, was closed from about 5 o'clock this morning, unless I heard it's still closed from flooding. So we can't get south out of Bishop right now.
Wow.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm a minute late. I'm glad we have really good attendance to our Far Northern California Power and Nature meeting, and the whole coalition has been invited. I'm seeing more people join. I will give it another minute or so. There's a lot happening around the state right now, between the floods down south, and for us up here in the far north, there are some serious fires happening up at the Smith River. So I hope everybody is staying safe that are up there, and all in our thoughts. And we hope that the winds keep in our favor. I think there were 13 separate fires due to lightning strikes, and they reduced down to 10. I haven't seen the latest update, so hopefully they've gotten control of some more of them. All right, well, I wanted to welcome you all. I am Sandra Sanchez, and I think most of you know me from around the coalition, but I'm very active in the far north because I live here, and I live up in Humboldt County in Arcata, and I'm so excited for this panel conversation, which was really born out of our Far Northern Regional Group, where a lot of our smaller land trusts and others had questions around how do we acquire these small parcels of land? They're a really important piece of 30 by 30. So I think you all know Josefina Barantes from EPIC, who helps to keep us all organized in the far north. And I'm going to pass it over to Josefina, who is going to be facilitating our conversation and who will lead us through the discussion. So thanks, Josefina.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to introduce our presenters for today. First, we have Kay Ogden of the Eastern Sierra Land Trust, who serves as their CEO and Executive Director. She is also the Vice Chair of the California Council of Land Trust and has been appointed to the CNRA 30 by 30 Partnership Coordinating Committee. This committee is composed of 18 environmental leaders from around the state and is tasked with fostering inclusive public communication and statewide coordination to advance California's 30 by 30 initiative. Today, she's going to be giving us a conservation easement 101 and also tips on talking to private landowners. Next, we have Melanie Schlotterbeck of Hills for Everyone. She serves as the Land Use and Conservation Consultant and is also a member of the CNRA 30 by 30 Partnership Coordinating Committee. Today, Melanie will be talking about the different pathways of land acquisition. Last but not least, we'll be having Vanessa Vasquez, who is the Sierra Cascade Land Trust Council Coordinator. She has 15 years of experience in the nonprofit sector and also holds a master's degree in environment community. She's excited to be sharing about her work in the Sierra Cascade Regional Land Conservation Planning and Interland Trust capacity building activities. So first, we're going to have our presenters speak today, and then we'll have about half an hour for a Q&A session afterwards. For the Q&A, we ask that each person raises their hand and also writes the question in the chat to make it easier for presenters to see the question. We ask that you hold all questions till the end, if that's okay. And yeah, any questions right now? All right. Well, Vanessa, are you cool to kick us off?
Yeah, I can start. Thank you. Hello, everybody. First, I'd like to say I'm not necessarily an expert in land acquisition myself, but I do have about 15 years in the land trust industry, and I coordinate this really amazing group of land acquisition experts. So I coordinate the Sierra Cascade Land Trust Council, which is 20 member groups, and it's about 16, regional land trusts that work between the Oregon border, the California Cascades, and all the way down to the Southern Sierra. And then I also have 4 members that are kind of the larger, more national or West Coast conservation groups, like the Pacific Crest Trail Association and Trust for Public Land, the Nature Conservancy, and California Rangeland Trust is also a member. So we have these small, from like one staff person land trust all the way up to really big land trusts. And one of the ways that Sierra Cascade Land Trust Council supports land acquisition and supports the goals of 30 by 30 is by offering a formal inter-land trust exchange. So that's something I'm really focused on right now, is creating and maintaining this peer-to-peer network for the Sierra Cascade region. And we do this kind of a couple different ways. So we share in between our meetings, we are just, sending each other questions about land acquisition projects and helping each other out as sharing resources. And then we also have a more formal channel where we have periodic meetings. We call them roundtables, where we'll all be collecting questions about land acquisition and land management projects. And then I find an expert who can speak to those questions within our group and also outside of our group sometimes. And we have these roundtables, and we're finding that this type of regional collaborative network is really helpful for accelerating the speed of land acquisition. And just, some of our members have very few staff, and they really could use that extra capacity building. So that is the model that the Sierra Cascade Land Trust Council is taking, is this regional cohort to help accelerate land acquisition projects. And most recently, we did a roundtable around remote monitoring for conservation easements. We also did a roundtable on developing and implementing management plans for conservation easements, so after they've closed. And then upcoming, we're planning a roundtable, this workshop forum to discuss land back instruments and options, the legal frameworks, and then also partnership and development of your capacity to work with tribal partners. So it is a really great group. So if you are working in the Sierra Cascade and you'd like to connect with us, I'd love to know about your work, and please reach out to me. And then for this larger group, I also wanted to share a couple of resources that we have that are publicly available beyond our membership. In 2021, we finished a strategic conservation action plan for the Sierra Cascade region. And that action plan identifies conservation benefits and strategies for the Sierra Cascade. So one, if you're a smaller land trust and you're just kind of looking for good definitions of conservation and language, this report is really, you can feel free to borrow any and all the language for like a grant application. I know some of our members use the language for their grant applications and for project development. And then we also have a web tool, and I'm going to try and share my screen. So bear with me. We did develop a web tool, and this is publicly available. And so this would really only be helpful for you if you're working, if your potential projects are within this Sierra Cascade region. And this boundary that you're seeing is more or less the Sierra Nevada Conservancy boundary. But you can say you're working on a conservation project, potential conservation project near Susanville, which is Lassen Land and Trails Trust is the land trust up there. You could upload a file, you could drop a shapefile in here, or you can even just select and draw an area. And then once you've drawn your area, you can then select a bunch of conservation criteria through these different conservation benefits, these different data sets, and then you can generate a report. So why you might want to use this, some of our members use this as kind of their initial, like their project planning when they're working on a potential land protection project. So you can kind of look to see what biodiversity is in the area, different water resources, any sort of development threat based on proximity to towns. There's a variety of different data sets that are all within here, and then you can generate the report and you can use it as kind of your initial step for your due diligence for your project planning. One of the downsides for this, besides it only being available for the Sierra Cascade region, is that it doesn't go down super small. So the smallest project area you can select on this map is 100 acres. And I know that this forum is kind of speaking to some of the smaller land protection projects, but so it's 100 acres or larger for this map. That's something, or for this mapping tool, but that is something we're interested in potentially updating if we are able to get some additional funding, because many of our members are doing smaller projects as well. Yeah, so please, if you're working in the Sierra Cascade region and you have any questions, I'd love to share more about our work, but we're really focused on kind of that inter-land trust exchange and capacity building to accelerate land protection in our region. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vanessa. That was awesome. Really cool tool. All right, Kay, are you ready for your part?
I'm going to try. I'm having some technological challenges. Can you all see that slide?
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
Oh, fantastic. Let's see. So this is just who we are. We've organizationally Eastern Sierra Land Trust been here for 22 years. And oh, guess what? It's not working. Oh, there we go. I have no idea what's happening. So this is just our particular mission of what we do. And you can see it's a really broad scale of things that we put everything through the filter of to try to figure out what projects and how we can do it. And if you look at it, you can see for us, there's something really missing here that we just had a strategic retreat about, and people are missing from this, and cultural values are missing. So we're in the process of updating that. And I just wanted to give a little snapshot of who ESLT is, because land trusts are weird. And there's a lot of different sizes and a lot of different places. And you just kind of see, we basically are 9% of the state of California, and we have 10% of federally recognized tribes in our territory. And we work through fee title, conservation easements, deed restrictions, transfers, which is where we get into public ownership, and we're also working on several land back projects right now. This is just the area that we happen to work in. It's a very weird map, but the purple dots, that's all in Mono County. We've only been able to secure projects so far, complete projects in Mono County, although stay tuned, because in the next couple of weeks, we hope to be announcing our first completed project in the state of Nevada. So what is a land trust? You know, when I was hired 10 years ago, I didn't know what land trust did. It's a very unique niche, and it's a very unique tool. The predominant tool that we use is called a conservation easement, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But our mission as a 501c3 charitable entity is to provide a public benefit. How do we provide a public benefit? We work with our communities to conserve habitat, and you know, with all of the 30 by 30 issues that are woven through connectivity, biodiversity, equitable access, and in perpetuity. Some land trusts don't work in perpetuity. Some do conservation easements for 20 or 30 years. My land trust only does it in perpetuity, and that only helps it fit also for 30 by 30. But the biggest thing here, that when you're talking to land trusts, it's willing landowners. It's just key that there's a myth out there that land trusts take land from private property holders and give it to the government. No, we work with private landowners, and it's a collaboration. Land trusts also work within their communities. So this is just some of the things that ESLT does. We do youth education, we do stewardship, we do volunteer days. And the reason I'm bringing this up is these are all ways to work within your community to help build respect and trust. Because without respect and trust in your local community, you're not going to get very far. We also just do migration corridor work. We're working on a wildlife crossing here, which is pulling in a lot of support, not only from willing landowners, but from visitors who come up to the area. So what is this tool that we use? The main tool that land trusts use is called the conservation easement. Now, I will say land trusts also either own fee title, just like if you own a home, you have a fee title, you own that property. So some land trusts only own their property, some purchase, some are donated, some work with the conservation easement tool. We also have deed restrictions where we monitor for BLM on some of their property. And then we also buy property and give it into public ownership, like the Forest Service or something like that. And then there's the land back model. So on a conservation easement, what the heck is this tool? It's a very powerful tool when it works. When it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But what it is a binding legal agreement between a willing landowner, funders, and the land trust. And it has to have a public benefit. So usually an easement is going, usually always an easement is going to point out the conservation values on that property. Conservation values obviously vary tremendously from one property to another. And that's why easements can take multiple years to do, because one of the things you're doing is identifying the conservation values. That might be habitat, in my case, habitat for the bi-state sage grouse. It might be a migration corridor. It might be a wetland. It might have special values of a river, but those things need to all be identified, and then you match your funding source with those. It also, the easement as a tool also restricts uses that can impair those values. The obvious one there is subdivision and homes. We recently closed on a project that had 80 development rights. So it could have been developed and had 80 different homes on the property. The thing that we do is it's permanent and it stays with the land. So another myth is that the easement, we say the easement is held over the land. The landowner retains ownership. The easement is over the land, and then it is attached permanently to title. So the landowner can sell the land, can give the land to an heir, but the easement goes with it. It also sets us up for the next step, because legally we then have to monitor the land in perpetuity as well, to monitor to make sure those conservation values are being upheld over the years. Now, how does it work? It works because the landowner and the land trust collaborate together to identify the conservation values. They agree on what's going to be permitted, what isn't going to be permitted, and what might be permitted with the right consultation. The land trust then purchases at fair market value, which is a whole other problem of how you get to fair market value. But the land trust purchases those development rights. Like I said earlier, we then attach the title and we extinguish them, so they're off the books. The landowner continues to own and manage the land, and we monitor the property. And of course, there is ongoing communication, which helps build consistent trust. We often say we're married to our landowners and a divorce isn't possible. And why does it work? It works because you've built a trusting relationship, and together you and the funders and the landowner agree on what those conservation values are and how you're going to protect them. How you're going to can be a little bit more problematic. It's really important to find the common values when you're talking with your landowners and identify those common values and focus on those common values. One thing that some people say to me often is, what, you have to buy those development rights? Why don't they give them to you? Well, because in my case, if it's a cattle ranch or something, it's a business. And when we can remember that these landowners have a business to run, or they're thinking about their family heirs, it isn't just all from the good of their heart or their love of the land. It also is a business model. Oops. Someone's got some. There you go. Thanks. And another reason that it works is because there's authentic trust and respect between the entities, and that can take time, right? You can't just step into something and automatically have someone trust you and be able to believe you. So sometimes it takes years to build these relationships. And something that's kind of hard sometimes is that it takes compromise to get these deals done. Sometimes you have the vision of, I'll just say a 10 conservation value protection. Maybe the landowner comes in with a 1, and you have to navigate that. You've got to figure out what's the bigger purpose. We just negotiated a 2,200 acre conservation easement, and we had to negotiate a building site for one house for the family over the course of in perpetuity. But where we wanted it put, we had to negotiate a little bit, and we had to see that that's better than not.
Video of land acquisition.
That's not doing. If we lost the project, everything would be gone. So you have to figure out how you can find that Venn diagram, honor your values, honor the landowner's values, honor the funder's needs, as well as the conservation values on the land to try to remember. Sometimes you've got to give to get. And I just want to always make sure, because this gets forgotten a lot, the landowners are the heroes. And these just two happen to be male. We have landowners who are female too. These are just some recent projects. The landowners are key to this, because without your voluntary landowners, you're not going to be able to do anything. And I just want to say, why doesn't it work? Well, sometimes it doesn't work because any of the parties don't have a vision, and you can't be creative and you can't look forward, because sometimes it takes creativity to get these things done. Sometimes the appraisal comes in too low. It's a common problem, and we lose projects when appraisals fair market value and the appraisals don't match either what the landowner thought or what the funders think. Quite often there's a challenge through California Department of Governmental Services. These things take forever, and sometimes it just doesn't work for the landowner, or your grant funds might run out before you can come to terms with your landowner. And sometimes the family just can't agree. I just wanted to show this as an example of a 30 by 30 project. This is Honeywell Ranch. It's 4,100 acres. It's a working cattle ranch in the middle of Bridgeport Valley. And we used farm bill funds. We used state funds. We used California Deer Association funds. And a commonly used source for us to use for conservation easements is the Sustainable Agriculture Land Conservation Program. We could not use those funds on this project because Honeywell Ranch has a guest house, and the SALC funds use cap and trade. They were trying to reduce greenhouse gases, and the guest ranch brings in 40 guests a week. So that great funding source was not appropriate for the use of permanently protecting this. And that's the other challenge, is matching your funding sources with the conservation values. I just want to quickly say, these are the types of issues that land trusts and conservation partners are working with all the time. There's new models in the land trust world of looking at housing and recreation and justice and equity. And of course, you guys all know about 30 by 30. And I just wanted to end with this slide. This is Charlotte Lang. She's the chairwoman of the Mono Lake Cotzetica tribe. Oh, I'm going to cry. Sorry, just ignore me. So this is a project we're working with that is land back. The Mono Lake Cotzetica is a federally unrecognized tribe. We've been trying for years, decades, to be recognized, and we are collaborating with them. We just received some funds from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy to get fee title, so they will own the land, 170 acres. They will own the land, and we're collaborating to help get the transaction through. So that's a quick rundown, and I know there'll be some questions on some of the models that land trust can use, a quick 101 on conservation easements.
Thank you so much, Kay. That was awesome.
It's fast.
Are you ready for me?
Yep.
Perfect. So again, Melanie Schwaderbeck with the regional nonprofit Hills for Everyone. I'm going to walk through 15 different ways that I have been involved with protecting land. Because there are 15, I'm not going to be able to spend a whole lot of time on any one of them, but my contact information is on the last slide, and happy to chat with anyone. I did used to work for the Trust for Public Land, so some of these were related to that experience, and then I also have served as a consultant to other groups throughout the state. So not all of these are through Hills for Everyone, but that's who the presentation is through today. So the one acquisition method that most people are familiar with is fee title, where you purchase the fee title. The example is this property, First National Investment, 320 acres. We worked with the Wildlife Conservation Board to fund the acquisition, and it's being held temporarily by the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, and it will be transferred to California Department of Parks and Recreation. This is the most straightforward way I have ever done a transaction. Another pretty straightforward way is a block grant. This tends to be a larger dollar figure. So I was able, through the Trust for Public Land, to be involved with about 5 acquisitions where we had a $15 million block grant from the Wildlife Conservation Board, and we were basically given a geography, the western edge of the Cleveland National Forest, the Trabuco District specifically, where we could acquire lands in that geography without having to go to WCB for every single transaction because the block grant had been approved for the entire thing. Another one that's pretty creative though is settlement mitigation. So the land in this picture is part of a development project called Cielo Vista, and they protected this canyon, 42.7 acres. And where I'm actually standing when I took that photo and behind me is what's getting developed. So this was a settlement agreement between the local group, which was a fiscally sponsored group of Hills for Everyone, and the developer to set aside this land in perpetuity. There's another program that I helped create in Orange County called a Regional Advanced Mitigation Program, or RAMP. And the Orange County Transportation Authority, or OCTA, essentially set aside funding through its freeway program. 1/2 cent for every dollar spent in Orange County went to fund the entire measure, but within the freeway program itself, 5% of all of the program revenues went to programmatic mitigation. So to date, we have protected 1,300 acres. We got a total of $240 million available to us. This is not something that you can do in a day. It took a lot of negotiating, but there's a benefit to advanced mitigation because you're basically able to bundle impacts and bundle mitigation, so you have more thoughtful acquisitions. We also were able to include restoration, so we have 350 acres being restored, and management, which is not something you normally get to see funded through an acquisition process. So we still have about $150 million left to spend in this one program. Also, CEQA mitigation, the California Environmental Quality Act. This landscape in front of us, the north side of the road, was just preserved through a development process on land that Era Energy owned on the west side of this canyon. And 82 acres that they owned were going to be restored and protected in perpetuity and dedicated to Chino Hills State Park as well. So sometimes hand in hand with development, you can also accomplish restoration and preservation. Then there's the straight landowner donation. This property has a lot of walnut woodlands on it, which was something we were specifically looking for. And this particular landowner didn't quite know what was the development potential when they bought it. And when they did their homework after the fact, realized that it really wasn't developable because of streams, lack of access, and steep slopes. And so they worked with us to get it donated, and it will be transferred into Chino Hills State Park in probably a couple years. I've also been involved with a land swap through the U.S. Forest Service, where there was land up in, it was up near Mammoth Lakes, and the Forest Service didn't want it because it was outside their target geography. And so they sold that property, and we recirculated the funds to buy Fremont Canyon 1, because there was a Fremont Canyon phase 2 as well. And this then got added into the Trabuco district of the Cleveland National Forest. A grant backup. I didn't know what to call this one. I was approached by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because the project that they had funding for fell through. And so they said, this is the habitat we need to buy for. Do you have anything? And I said, of course I do. So this is my clue to you to be in touch with federal and state funders who may be working on transactions. But if a deal falls through, you may have something that can fill in what's needed. So know your habitats, because I got 320 acres protected a couple years ago because the other deal fell through. A change in policy. This one was pretty exciting. Everyone's heard of Liberty Canyon on the 101 freeway. 20 years ago, so well before Liberty Canyon, my mom actually worked with state parks. A guy named Gary Hund, who's now with the Mojave Desert Land Trust, read a book called Song of the Dodo, and they realized that if we didn't connect our landscapes together, our islands of habitat weren't going to matter. And so what you're looking at is the most traveled freeway in all of the nation, which is the 91 freeway. On the upper side of the photo is the Cleveland National Forest, Santa Ana Mountains area. On the south side is a golf course and Chino Hills State Park. And so my mom and Gary worked to change state policy with California State Parks, and they ended up putting together the fact that wildlife corridor and connectivity issues should be the hot topic of every acquisition, because if our landscapes aren't connected, the biodiversity goes down, et cetera. So 2 properties, both of them entitled, were purchased for $53 million plus a $10 million landowner donation. And we now have a connection underneath the 91 freeway for mountain lions, which are now proposed to be listed on the state endangered species list for the Southern California subspecies. And the good news is this set the model for all sorts of other wildlife corridors to be successful. We also in Orange County created the state's first Natural Communities Conservation Plan. That's the state version. The federal version is the Habitat Conservation Plan. And we've protected 38,000 acres in Orange County. So cities, agencies, transportation agencies all sign on to this. Here are my impacts. Here's what we can set aside and preserve. And they basically do advanced mitigation through this state and federal mechanism. We also have mitigation banks that we've been involved with near Chino Hills State Park. And so you have specific habitat types that can be restored, and developers or whoever's in need of those mitigation, the habitat types rather, can buy into the bank and permanently set aside and restore those lands. Some of the coolest things I've been involved with was a land use agreement that actually protected 270,000 acres of Tejon Ranch. So I know it's incredibly controversial. I was not one of the negotiators, but through the Planning and Conservation League at the time, an acquisition deal was struck where the majority, 90% of the Tejon Ranch property was preserved and 10% was going to be allowed for development. Another really cool mechanism, and I'm going to just point out, if you don't know Terry Watt, she's amazing. She's the one that comes up with all these great ideas. She set up through the Martis Valley a 0.25% transfer fee. So every real estate transaction on a house in the Martis Valley basically gets this 0.25% dedicated to conservation, workforce housing, and habitat restoration. And that has funded additional acquisitions in the Lake Tahoe area. And they also give grants through the Martis Valley Fund. And another cool mechanism in the Puente Chino Hills is a tipping fee. So if you have a landfill in your area that is potentially going to be negotiated for an extension, you might want to get in on that. We had the Puente Hills landfill, which set aside $1 for every ton of trash brought to that landfill. And to date, 3,800 acres have been preserved in the middle of Southern California because of trash. So be creative. Another thing that you should be paying attention to is zoning. So you've already heard the name Era Energy. They also own 3,000 acres that sits at the border of LA County and Orange County. We have been working with LA County in updating their general plan elements. And one of the things they just approved at the Planning Commission level, so it still needs to go to the supervisors, is that the zoning went from 1 unit per acre to 1 unit per 40 units per acre. See if I can get this out. 1 unit per 40 acres. And now that I see this, I typed that wrong. But so that actually decreased the number of available housing units that could be built on this landscape. And as Kay mentioned earlier, fair market value comes into play, and what's allowed to be built on a property changes that fair market value. So if this gets approved by the Board of Supervisors, the reality is that downzoning just made it a lot easier to buy for conservation. So with that, my contact information is here if anyone would like to get a hold of me, and I'm happy to drop this into the chat as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melanie. That was awesome. So now we'll hold our Q&A session for the presenters. If anybody has a question, you can drop the question in the chat and raise your hand, and we will get to you. If no one has an immediate question, I do. So for Vanessa, and this could also be for everyone else, but mostly for Vanessa's position, it seems like a lot of land trusts that are smaller could benefit from having a coordinator such as yourself. Does the funding for your position come from a specific pot of funds, or is it just the land trust general funds?
That's a great question. So I work very part-time. So currently my role is funded through our membership dues, which are really affordable. So it's not a very large pot of money, but it's enough to pay for me to work super part-time and coordinate these roundtables, and which are, you know, these capacity building activities, and then our quarterly board meetings. But we are currently, we're going to be putting in some grant proposals for some additional funds to deepen our engagement. And also, we are looking to hopefully next year do what we're calling a land protection boot camp. So all things land acquisition, a training for kind of like the next generation of land acquisition specialists. So yeah, that's something we're working on. But right now it's just, I'm just funded super part-time through membership dues.
Awesome, thank you. And we have a question in the chat. Can someone talk about more potential funding sources from Diane? Any of our panelists?
Do you want me to take a quick start at it, and then I think everybody could step in. So the funding sources are absolutely tied to your project. So depending on what you're trying to accomplish, there are different sources. So maybe why don't you tell me what the project is, and I can even fine tune it, because there's like Wildlife Conservation Board, they have their priorities and their different streams. The SALC program has theirs, DOC has theirs, and there's individual who let's see,
I'm sorry, I couldn't find my raise hand quick here when I submitted the question. So you had mentioned SALCP, and I guess I'm familiar with WCB and sort of standard habitat conservation, but the agricultural one is becoming of higher interest to us recently, just because we do have some land zoned for agriculture that's under tremendous threat of development. So where it has been in agriculture, particularly if we're talking about funding easements on agriculture where the landowner still owns it. Anybody speak to that a little bit?
The Sustainable Agriculture Land Conservation Program sounds like that could be a fit, in general with what you're saying. The whole purpose of that program is to keep working lands as working lands, to reduce the carbon footprint. So depending on that project, from just what you said, that sounds like that could be a match. Now, also WCB does fund conservation easements if there's co-benefits for wildlife, like bi-state sage grouse or migration corridor. Does that help any, Diane?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Kay. Do any of the other presenters have something to say about that question, or are we okay to move on?
Yeah, I'll just add, there are a lot of ways to get money. The biggest thing I do is create money. And so I work with folks that you normally wouldn't see environmental groups working with, because those are untapped resources in terms of conservation dollars. And so if a developer has to buy land to mitigate something, they're going to come to me and say, what do you have that can be purchased with this habitat on it? And so knowing your projects, and even I think I saw something about how do you approach them, you can send a letter and say, hey, we're in this business. If you're looking for places to restore, or you're looking for places to buy, reach out to us and we're happy to have a dialogue.
Great, thank you. Daniel Rossman, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask your question?
Sure, thanks. And thanks for the presenters for sharing information. I don't work in land acquisition at all. And that's not a niche the Wilderness Society plays. So my question is really to, because I do see the incredible value land trusts provide, how can organizations that don't work directly on this best collaborate and support this kind of work? And so maybe that's thinking about some of the policies that Melanie talked about advocating for, or maybe you have other examples of how you might have collaborated with groups that don't necessarily work on this strategy directly, but could be supportive in thinking about that bigger landscape scale vision. Thanks.
Yeah, I can chime in on that one. So a lot of what I do is policy based. And so I think that's certainly a role that you can play. We've had to run bills through the state legislature. So being in tune with that, supporting bills that support conservation. One of the log jams we've faced is that state parks, which is the largest landowner of all the state agencies, isn't really buying state park land anymore. They're funding community pools and local things, which is great, don't get me wrong, but that is not quite the mission of DPR. And so, refocusing and making sure that our agencies are funded, that they're meeting their actual mission, et cetera, are other ways to contribute. And then there are simple ways, like, for example, a letter of support for an acquisition before it goes before a funding board. You don't need to be involved in the day-to-day in order to do something like that.
Can I pop in as well, Daniel? I think something else that I think this is a good group to approach this, and it's kind of what Melanie was just talking about too, is that land trusts have, even though our lane is changing, there's a lane that we work a lot in. And sometimes that doesn't seem to fit the goals of some folks who consider themselves, I mean, I don't even know the word, hardcore environmentalists. I mean, I consider myself one of those, but my work, I'm in a different lane. And so how we can collaborate, because there are those times where, well, we can't get it 100% this way, but we could get it 85%. And isn't 85% better than 100? Some places it's not. Some places need to be 100%. I get that. But I'm sometimes willingness to work with us on where we have to make those tough compromises when the compromises are okay, could be helpful.
Thank you. Just going in the order of the chat, Susan Pletcher has a question for Melanie. Does the landowner trust approach developers to work out a deal to preserve a percentage of development land? How does that process work?
Yeah, good question. So normally through the development process, if it's a greenfield development versus an infill development, the state agencies and federal agencies, so Army Corps, Regional Board, Cal Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, are going to need to be involved in species, habitat protection, water courses, permitting, and they set the ratios and required mitigation. That doesn't prevent you from coming forward and saying, hey, I see your development plan, covers 30% of the land that you own. Are you interested in protecting the 70% that you're not developing? Any protection is better than no protection. And if I had to pick my way, I would rather have it in a land trust than a homeowners association, because they're not quite built the same way in terms of what their goals are. And so there's no harm in making an approach, but the actual ratios are set up by permitting agencies.
Thank you, Melanie. David, you have your hand up.
Yeah, it's really a multi-part question. And I asked a couple of parts of it separately in the chat, but my big concern, recently we've been having a lot of talk with the state about what's going to be in the bond fund and how much 30 by 30 money is going to be available through bonds. But one of the things that comes out very clearly in that conversation is that bond funding can be used to buy land, but it cannot be used for long-term management and monitoring of that land. So I was interested in the very quick pass you made over all those different funding mechanisms. Which of those funding mechanisms could include a long-term monitoring and management of the land? And the one that struck me the most clearly was that 1/4 cent on a transaction fee, because that could be used entirely for management and monitoring, it seems like, just depending on how that measure was written. So can you comment on how we can get more money for management and monitoring?
Yes, the age-old, how do we do this? Because, you know, when you own a home, it isn't just owning a home. You have to replace the roof at some point, and then the plumbing goes bad. And same thing with land. So what I have been successful doing most recently is making sure that landowners are actually contributing back to the management of the property. And so we've gotten, and somebody who's going to own and manage the land needs to do the math, because depending on its location, if it's being absorbed in a larger picture, it's the donut hole versus the donut hole is not going to cost as much to maintain or monitor as the donut would. And so it might just be $100 an acre. But if you actually have threatened and endangered species on the land that need to be maintained and studied at certain intervals, and you need to plan for things like wildfires and floods and catastrophes where you may need to restore an area because you've promised a specific commitment, that platinum level may be $10,000 an acre. So landowner donation is one avenue. If you're dealing with a funding mechanism like the tipping fee or the transfer fee or development fees, those all have potential to incorporate funding into them. There are some things that I have on my list to do related to unique funding sources that, you know, enhanced infrastructure finance district. You could set up a geography that taxes itself $1 a month. And that pays into a larger kitty that allows you to draw on that for management and monitoring. But those are long-term things that take a long time, political strategy, you know, elections, things like that to get adopted. But the problem with bonds is that you can't use that money for management.
Thanks, Melanie. We have another question in the chat from Arthur Levine. What are the best options for people dealing with small parcels that are 1 to 10 acres large that are very high land values, more than $500,000 per acre? Any of our panelists want to bite?
Melanie, you work in I would say it's hard, right? I'll just, that's hard, but people are doing it. There are easements in Napa, Sonoma, you know, Bay Area. The small size is hard because a lot of the agencies want to show connectivity and have a hard time, the donut hole kind of a thing. Like if there's a small 10-acre, 5-acre with development all around, you need to show why it's important to keep that protected from further development. And I bet Melanie can speak more to this. You know, my projects over here in rural California have different challenges than that.
Yeah, and I've only been involved with two small-ish ones, 9 acres and 13 acres. Most of the other ones were in the hundreds of acres. So I think it's going to depend on making the case for the acquisition. Just because it's small doesn't mean it's not important. So that's where communicating with, the funding agencies or the wildlife agencies are going to come into play. And I also wouldn't discount cities or counties. They may have park and lieu fees or other fees that they could contribute in some way, shape, or form to knock a few of those small ones off the list that get protected in some way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Melanie. Our next question is from Virginia for Melanie. How has the 15 million, sorry, the chat just reloaded and I lost the question. How was the 15 million block grant from WCB arranged? Typically, we have to apply for individual projects, which is tough when small parcels are often not as competitive as large acreage parcels. We'd love to replicate that model in priority areas along the Pacific Crest Trail.
Yeah, so I would start with a conversation with the funding agency that you're looking towards. Wildlife Conservation Board is the one that we got our block grant through. It was set up before I was hired by TPL, so I'm not entirely sure of the mechanism, although I've recently had a conversation with WCB that they are interested in doing block grants again in order to streamline acquisitions. So it would be contacting, Joe or Navari or somebody on staff to see what the possibility of that is and the mechanism.
Thank you. Our next question is from Darren. When is the best time to publicly announce an acquisition? At signing of purchase agreement, or do you wait until closing?
I'll step in quickly. You see Melanie and I both are smiling. So much can go wrong after the purchase and sale agreement. I mean, your project, normally you don't have your appraisal till after then. So we normally do not, at ESLT, we normally do not announce our projects until we close. Now, that said, sometimes our funding partners, such as the recent one we just did with Sierra Nevada Conservancy, they get so excited about the projects that they're funding that they announce it. So that, like my land back project got announced earlier than we would announce it because the funding entity wanted to share the project. But normally we don't do any of our media until we close.
That's helpful. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I was going to add, I laughed because through Power in Nature, we actually did a press event in March on phase 2 of the First National Investment Properties, which was the first slide I showed on the fee title. And ultimately it was to pressure the landowner to sign the purchase and sale agreement because we were showing that we brought the money in. We're ready to go and they just need to sign the paperwork. And we got a signed purchase and sale agreement within 3 weeks of that press event. And so it's going to come down to strategy, really. But you need to know when you can use it and how to use it and whether or not that's going to scare somebody off. So.
Good insight. Thanks.
Awesome. I know we're nearing the end, so if the presenters could kindly put their emails in the chat if you're open to receiving questions over email in case we don't get to anybody's or everybody's questions. We have one more question that I want to hear all of your guys' answers to, but it's particularly for Kay regarding land back efforts. Can you tell us more about how you were able to gain traction to support land return? And for those that are not full return, have you have had any success regarding cultural access to lands for Indigenous peoples?
It's a great question. Thanks so much. And I'll say for our efforts here, we've been working with the tribal communities for a decade or more in small ways. And how this particular project happened, you know, I'm quite honest and transparent about this. Being on the PCC, you know, as we all have learned, we've learned about additional funding coming for tribal engagement. And I contacted Chairwoman Charlotte, the picture from earlier, and I was all excited. And she just was quiet, didn't say a word. And a few minutes later, we started having a conversation, and for 2-3 hours, I was reminded about the history of land grabs against our Indigenous partners and our community and our friends, and how 30 by 30 was being viewed by many as another land grab, another way for white people to get more land that could eventually go into land back. And I have to be honest, I never thought of it that way. I never thought of it that way. And having the conversation and being schooled and being open to it and having a continued conversation opened the door for this project. We had a great conversation. We said we were going to circle back, you know, sometime. And in between there, I got a phone call from Sierra Nevada Conservancy saying they had some funds and did I have a shovel-ready project? I called my tribal partners and we went for it and we got it. So I think it's a mixture, you know, it's relationship building. It's being willing to be wrong. It's being willing to learn. It's being willing to step back in order to step forward. I know that sounds silly, but this project we're working on, I could have built in ESLT being paid for our work, and I didn't, because I didn't want it to look like I was doing that to get paid. I didn't want it to look like I was working with them to get something. So I have stepped way back in order to be a partner and to be authentic.
Thank you so much, Kay. That was an awesome answer. We are at time, so if any of our presenters or participants have to leave, I totally understand. But Annalisa Rush raised her hand. Do you still have your question, Annalisa?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to share some insights that I can share with this group about that last question as well. In my experience, what helps is obviously learning the history of, you know, the tribal communities with whom we're working, and then also to work with the movements of intertribal land trusts that are developing, and in partnership with them, you know, if we are acquiring land as land trusts, to work with them, you know, if they are in the development stages, to kind of create agreements that will ensure that, you know, eventually if we're collaborating and joining together land trust efforts, you know, that could be part of the land return as well. And also just recognizing, you know, tribal ecological knowledge and colonial structures that we are all living in the dominant culture is important to deconstruct that and sort of recognize that, you know, even restoration and all these, you know, models that we work within are models as a legacy of colonialism. And so they may differ from, you know, a tribal approach to things as well. So just to keep that in mind in the connections.
Thank you so much, Annalisa. Well, we're past 3 o'clock. I just want to thank everybody for coming, and especially to our presenters. Thank you so much. This was super helpful. If I didn't get to your question because it was lost in the flurry of the chat, I apologize. Don't hesitate to reach out to any of the panelists that put their emails in the chat or myself. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. I will be sending out a recording as soon as it's available. Bye, everyone.